So we're in week 5. The first. How many of you read the article of this week's study?
I read the chapter.
The chapter, yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I may not have. Did I just? Pardon me?
I have divided the book. I went online, but
That's it.
we still have to catch up with the rest of you.
Did I explain that the book is on the website too, that you can read it there if you want?
Maybe you did, but I probably wasn't paying attention.
Okay. Well, anyway, there's this book called The Truth of Happiness. This study, this 12-week study, is based on that book, and we're in the 5th week right now. Each week, what we're doing is reading that particular chapter, and then doing a little writing on it, a paragraph or two, just so we understand it as best as we can, and then we talk about it. That's what the discussion part of it is. Great. And so last Saturday, I think we're about 45% through this chapter, and I read and talked about that on Saturday. Right view and right intention that we looked at a week ago. Initial right view is simply the view that I am ignorant of Four Noble Truths, of true human reality as described as Four Noble Truths. And because of that ignorance of Four Noble Truths, I fabricate a self in relation to the world that, because of the fabrication itself, rooted in ignorance, is prone to craving after continued self-establishment rooted in fabricated views, and clinging to those views once established, no matter what those views are. So I ask this a lot. Is that clear to everyone there, what I just said?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the beginning of stress and suffering. And so the solution to stress and suffering that this brilliant man figured out is applied directly there. And it's related to where we are right now in that Eightfold Path. So right view is initially the entry point. I'm accepting that I don't know something. And here is a way to understand that. And I also understand, we went into this pretty extensively on Saturday, how strong an intention to maintain a fabricated ego self is, and what is necessary to recognize and abandon that powerful but subtle need, reactive need for a fabricated self to continually maintain itself in the world. And that leads us to the virtuous factors of the Eightfold Path, so-called. Right speech, right action, and right livelihood. I call them virtuous factors because they're rooted in virtue, meaning I speak kindly and gently, I act in the same way, and my livelihood follows. But the reason why these are significant to the Dhamma is not just because we'll be good people. It is because when we become mindful of our thoughts, our words, our deeds, and the way those deeds manifest at times in what we do for a living, that is where I notice the results of my thinking. In other words, if my thinking is rooted in ignorance, it's going to manifest itself in the words that I use, the actions that I take, and at times in what I do to make a living. And also I should mention that right livelihood does not just pertain to what we do for a living. It's really, what am I doing to establish myself in the world is a more broader way of looking at that aspect of right livelihood. And that encompasses that, and it brings right intention into that, doesn't it? So when we are mindful of what's coming out of our mouth, we are mindful of our thoughts, because it's our thoughts that are driving what's coming out of our mouth, isn't it? I mean, we first have to have a thought in order for anything to come out of my mouth. And if what's coming out of my mouth is less than ideal as defined by right speech, then I know that there's something lacking within me. There's some point of understanding in relation to Four Noble Truths that I'm missing, or I wouldn't be thinking, speaking, or acting in any way that's hostile towards myself or towards anyone. And then another, and I'll talk more about this too, another just as significant aspect of right speech, and maybe more so, is the speech that I'm telling myself, that story that I always have going in my head. And it's that story that's always going on in my head that is, the purpose of that story is to continually reinforce wrong views. And that's why right speech, right action, right livelihood are such a significant aspect of the Dhamma in showing us the results of our thinking. Is that clear to everyone?
Very good, yeah.
And it just what I just said about a thought always precedes anything that comes out of my mouth. I mean, that's kind of obvious. But any action that a human being takes has to be preceded by a thought. Even something that might be like a reflex action, there's still a thought underneath it. But the best example that I can give of that is when I leave tonight, in order for me to walk out the door, I don't just get up and walk out the door, do I? I first have a thought. Well, class is over. It was a great class. Time to go home. There's a thought behind everything that we do. And the reason why I'm making an emphasis of this point is the thought behind what we're doing in this moment determines what my experience of this moment is going to be. And if my thought is framed by the Eightfold Path, this is a teaching on karma too that I'll get into deeper in week 7 or 8. If what I'm holding in mind is framed by the Eightfold Path, then this moment is a moment that is inclined towards awakening, towards putting aside all of those things that are rooted in wrong view and wrong intention. And in this moment, how do I know what the state of my thinking or my consciousness is? By being mindful of what's coming out of my mouth and the actions that I'm taking. And it's always that. This isn't right speech, right action, right livelihood aren't preliminary steps, although they're usually the initial foray into an Eightfold Path. But they're relevant throughout the development of the path and beyond. It's just a natural expression of an awakened human being. Does everybody have that clear too? The reason why I'm saying that is as we start developing the Dhamma, then we can rely on aspects of right speech, action, and livelihood to reinforce the Dhamma within ourselves. Another reason why we don't have completely silent retreats is because it negates the value of practicing right speech. In other words, right speech informs noble silence. There cannot be noble silence, using that word noble. There cannot be true noble silence without the focus on right speech, because then it's just forced silence. It's agreed upon silence, but there's no insight gained into why am I being silent. The reason why I'm being silent in this moment is because I don't have anything that fits within right speech. We experience that on retreat because of the framework that we establish on retreat. And then we develop noble silence because we then agree to take our meals in noble silence. But the rest of the time on retreat, those that have been on retreat, how many times do I ask you, how's your right speech going? And at least a dozen times, because that's the point. If we were engaged in 4 days of complete silence, there's no opportunity for right speech, is there? And again, it's something that Buddha never taught, noble silence without right speech. In fact, there's a Dhammapada section where he said, it's not by silence alone that the wise become awakened. A little bit of a paraphrase, but it's true. We have to be mindful of our speech if we want to be mindful of what we're thinking and how we're acting. All right, this is back to the article. Frank, I don't know the page. It's about 40 some odd %. And the beginning is from the perspective of right view, which is right where I left off on Saturday. Did you find it?
No, not yet. I'll catch up. Thank you.
Let me see what the paragraph before is. Right speech also pertains to what we are saying to ourselves. Got it?
125.
Okay. Everybody got that? 125 if you're reading along. From the perspective of right view and the direction of right intention, right speech develops to very subtle levels. Once gross wrong speech is identified and mindfully abandoned, recognition of speech that may have seemed helpful and altruistic may now be seen to be manipulative and designed to elicit a particular response. A lot of altruistic behavior, seemingly altruistic behavior, falls into just that category. We're really saying something in order to elicit a response from someone. Even if we think that the response is helpful to the person, it's still manipulating. It's still not getting to the reason why there's an external situation is not because someone else doesn't know right speech. It's because someone else is rooted in ignorance. So the proper response isn't a Band-Aid. The proper response is using yourself as an example. And that doesn't mean every time you come across someone else engaged in wrong speech, you got to slam them with the Dhamma. But it's never helpful to counter wrong speech with your own wrong speech. Never. It only leads to it. And this gets into very, very subtle levels of how we live in the world today. And I won't get too deep into it. But a lot of this, if you want to get a good view of it, Just look at the politics in this country. And the only reason I bring it up is it's such a perfect example of ongoing wrong speech that people believe is right speech. Just look what's coming out of both sides' mouth. They're both guilty of wrong speech. Being mindful of words expressed towards others will show the state of your well-being and understanding. In other words, if we're always kind in our thoughts, words, and our deeds to other people, always, and most importantly to ourselves, we are starting to integrate the Eightfold Path the way it's intended. And when we notice the very occasional situations where I find myself speaking in anger or lying or gossiping, another aspect of lying would be exaggerating something, could be something pertains to me or a situation. I know that there's something wrong in my thinking. And oftentimes we'll blame the world or another person for our wrong speech. You know, Flip Wilson had that great line, "The devil made me do it." But most people don't know who Flip Wilson, right? Some people do. That's the excuse that we blame other people when we do something that we wish we hadn't done. And we put it on other people, we put it on situations, we put it on a lack of not analyzing myself when I was 7 years old and something terrible happened. All of that is just a distraction. If I'm engaging in wrong speech, action, or livelihood in any way in this moment, it's because my mind is still rooted in ignorance. That's all that I want to know about it. I don't want to know, well, it might be coming from this, or there's a social situation that kind of precludes complete right speech. It's all nonsense. It's all nonsense if we are true Dhamma practitioners. That doesn't mean that we don't marry wisdom with our right speech. And then that leads to noble silence. We know when something isn't helpful. And so in this moment, there could be something that is obviously helpful to Mary for her to know, and it would greatly enhance her life. But I also know the situation well enough that Mary is not going to accept what I say. So what should I do? It's the great conundrum, isn't it, of the person, the great person filled with compassion and wants to help another person. But I know it won't help. I know that she'll either at best disregard it and more than likely get upset over it. The wise person keeps their mouth shut. That's noble silence. That's noble silence because it has the intention for right speech behind it. Some people would argue it was right speech to say, you know, Mary, you're really failing at this. And if you just did it this way, you'd be a better person. Because I'm just trying to help. Well, you're not trying to help, are you? Look at that. And this is an important point. Look at that situation. My intention was to help Mary. But the judgment that Mary needed help is the problem, isn't it? Instead of understanding that Mary's problem and everybody else's problem, according to what the Buddha awakened to, is ignorance of Four Noble Truths. So how best can I help Mary in this situation? I'm just picking on Mary, by the way. If I feel that she's open to understanding any bit of the Dhamma, it's okay to talk about it. More than likely, those situations aren't going to be apparent. And the best thing that I can do is to be an example of the Dhamma. To not be threatening to someone who's not ready to let go of something. Look at the difficulties we've created in the world by individuals and then groups thinking they have the right idea, they have the right way to live in the world, and other people have to follow me. And if they don't, that can often lead to justifiable homicide. The modern jihadists have that all down, but in past times, a lot of Christians had it down too. And I'm not picking on Christians. There's no religion that has escaped that notion that my God is right, I'm right, and other people should die because of it. But that's where that notion comes from, that I know what's better for you. We wiped out an entire culture that has yet to rebound with that idea. I'm talking about Hawaii. It's yet to come back. Before we went to, I'm getting on my high horse, I'll do it quickly. Before we ever went to Hawaii, the Hawaiians, the Polynesians, had a worldwide economy. They had found ways to resolve difficulties within themselves, even though they were still a warring society. And we come in and we see nothing but savages that we're going to save them. And we didn't, did we? But we do that all the time. And we do it with individuals, we do it on a global scale, and we haven't learned anything from it. it's not like we're evolving past something like this idea that I know what's right for you, and if you don't follow me, you're evil. Again, look at politics today, but look at how we interact with each other. And again, I'm not talking about this sangha, but a lot of our difficulties in the world come from me wanting the world or other people in the world to be different. It's the essence of the Dhamma to understand that's my problem, not others, not the world's problem. Anytime that I want something to be different than it is, I'm engaged in wrong view and wrong speech, wrong action, and wrong livelihood. Anytime.
It's really strange, though, how right now politics is very negative and counterintuitive to what Michelle Obama said. You know, when they go low, we go high. What works, it's so strange, but what works is when one group goes low and the other group goes lower. That's when people respond to that. It's very, very bizarre.
It is, but that was somebody, I can't remember who it was, said that's what we should do as part of their party.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when they go low, we'll go lower. Well, it was Eric Holder, I remember who it was.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, so just to use that as an example, not to beat the guy up, this is an intelligent man, a former attorney general.
Right, but he was observing what actually happens, not the way we should conduct ourselves.
Well, I took the statement as saying that's what we should do, but I also understand what you're saying. But that's the reaction, isn't it? That's the reaction of a mind rooted in ignorance. You hurt me. The only response then is I got to hurt you back, and that's where we're at.
So ugly.
That's where. But again, I'm not blaming Democrats. I'm not blaming Republicans. I'm not blaming the United States. This is the common human condition. It just happens to be manifest right now because of certain situations that came together. You know, a perfect storm, back in 2016. And again, it's all of it is an example of our ignorance. All of it, every bit of it. And you can't point to one person and say, well, they're right because they're more aligned with my ideology. Hatred is hatred. Anywhere. It's never appropriate. Again, I don't mean to be got on my high horse. I'm not speaking against one side or another. In fact, I'm speaking in the whole world. Hatred at any point is wrong. It's rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And it never leads to. Hatred is another word for it, a milder term is aversion. We know that greed, aversion, and deluded thinking are the result of ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Aversion or hatred, even though if we seem to justify it, is still rooted in ignorance, isn't it? Frank, you had a question or comment?
I was just going to mention that for myself, my speech has gotten better internally and externally from right view and understanding, right intention, and it's more of a fruition than an objective. It's not that I'm trying with speech.
Yep.
It's more of that's what comes to fruition when I can abandon craving and clinging. I can be kind, because being kind and non-cruelty is actually less cruel to myself.
Yep.
And it releases the pain and suffering a lot quicker than reacting with wrong speech or continuing anger and ill will.
Yep. And you're right. It's the result of a well-focused Dhamma practice. It's not in this moment. It's important to recognize: am I engaged in right speech, etc. But ongoing right speech, action, and livelihood is rooted in the Dhamma. It's not rooted in a reflective action. It's a responsive action. It becomes part of me. There was a time in my life when I initially sobered up. I was 26 years old, and I remember in AA you're given somebody who's called a sponsor. They're supposed to guide you through. It doesn't work anymore, but they guide you through the 12 steps. And my sponsor was doing this. He was taking me through this process of self-reflection, which is what the 12 steps are meant to be. And we got to this point where you're taking an inventory, and you're telling this person about yourself. And I remember I was in tears because I was just so upset. Bob, if you're a real drug addict and alcoholic, you tend to lie a lot. and you get caught up in it. And I remember saying to Bob, I was so full of lies, I did not know. Honestly, I did not know when I was telling the truth anymore. And I remember crying to Bob saying, I honestly don't know what the truth is. And this was 1981. And I still remember everything that he said. He's right in front of me right now. He says, if you want to be honest, be honest. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. It was the right thing to say and incredibly obvious. But for the first time in my life, I understood that if I wanted to be a different person, it was possible, but I had to change some behaviors. And that initial foray probably led me to where I am today, because it gave me the license to look at myself in a realistic way, rather than trying to find something that was wrong with me. In other words, Bob didn't say, boy, you're the biggest piece of garbage because look at all you do is lie. He took it right where it was. If you want to be an honest person, be honest. If we want to engage in right speech and right action and right livelihood, we simply do it. And when we can't, that's where we bring the Dhamma in. It doesn't mean that if I find myself lying tomorrow and I recognize it, it doesn't mean that I've done something wrong and I want to